I want to say welcome to the Emory Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Today, we're going to turn that cardio up, and we're just going to work on those abs. Plus, you know I must work on that total body sculpting today. So, get ready in 5 seconds. We're going to get ready to go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here we go. Create that circulation. Come on. We're creating that circulation right now. Create that vibration. Come on. You know we don't want no hip stuff right now. Come on. Watch it now. Keep it going. Upper body. Bring it down, bring it. We're going to get that energy up. Watch it. We're going to make it more body. Let's go. Come on. We have a look at those abs here. Those hip flexors. Those quads, those hamstrings, let's go. Okay. We're going to go back in the upper body. You ready? Let's go. Come on. Watch it. Keep it going. We're working that out of 10. No shoulders and no legs. Watch it. Now we get those biceps. Come on. Get it. Come on now. I need y'all to keep that energy up. Keep that energy up. Bring it back. Get the legs up. Get them up. We get those quads. We get those hamstrings. And we get those abs. Get the legs up. Get them up. And rest. Great job. We're going to keep it going. Y'all know we must get these abs. Come on. Woo! Come on. We're getting that entire core right now. Just twist. Watch a little step.
My face above the water. My feet can't touch the ground, and it feels like
Get them
I
hands
can
up.
see the sands on the horizon every time you are not around.
Watch it now. Watch it.
Slowly drifting away.
I had to go
Wave
MC,
after wave,
but we still getting that core.
wave after wave.
Watch it now.
Slowly drifting away, and it feels like I'm drowning. make it easy. Easy to love me.
Come on.
Still I reach, find a way. I'm stuck here in between. I'm looking for the right words to say.
Bring it back, bring it back.
Slowly drifting away. Wave after wave, wave after wave. Slowly drifting away. And it feels like I'm drowning, pulling against the stream, pulling against the stream.
We get no side obliques. Come on. Let's switch legs. Great job, great job. Y'all bear with me. I'm not finished with y'all yet. Hey, hey,
Go.
let's go tonight. One more time. I need you to just rock with me. Right
I
now.
want to flex my love, I want to bless, and I want to carry my love to a place she loves. I want to bless, and I want to carry my love to a place she loves.
Keep rocking, 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 keep rocking. Y'all know we get the job on this. Come on, get him up, get him up. I need those hands up right now. Don't you stop. Y'all looking good. Y'all looking good. Y'all looking good right now.
Mi amor, you are the king. Te quiero más que lo que quiero. All the bling bling bling. Soy tu woman, yeah. You got the best. Nobody else can llevarme. I'm my baby. Think about you like daily. It's wherever you want, que quieres. Dale, dale, hurry on, baby. I'm ready, una nena, Francisco, Isabela, any hora, cualquier hora, only dance up con mi mirada. I want to flex my love, I want to flex, I want to carry my love away to a place we love.
We feeling good right now.
I want to bless,
I know you feeling good right now. Cause you're doing something good for that temple. And rest. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for coming on. Remember, it's so special to me to seeing you do something good for your temple. Make sure you tell a friend, make sure you tell a family member, even your neighbor, someone you may not even like that much. Just tell them to do something good for their temple. I'm John Lewis, and see you later. Bye.
Thank you, John. Okay, everybody. Today we're going to be given a presentation by Ms. Moon, who's one of our occupational therapists. And part of what an occupational therapist does is help us communicate and move a little bit better. For those of us who have family members who are affected with dementia or just aging in general and have difficulty moving, she's the type of person, the therapist, who helps inform us about what we need to do, how we need to do it, and how best to do it. I need you to understand that an occupational therapist is somebody who requires a doctor's order to do an evaluation, make an assessment, and make a prescription for what kind of treatment, what kind of activity your loved one requires. So, with no further explanation, I'm here for questions. Ms. Moon.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to share with you guys. Get my PowerPoint pulled up. So like Dr. Parker mentioned, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about communicating. Occupational therapists work a lot on moving your body and making sure that you're able to engage in whatever is most important to you. So if that is gardening, then we will help you find a way to garden, no matter what that means. We are kind of known for being creative and working around things when it doesn't look like it's possible. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about communicating effectively, yet compassionately. So making sure that we're getting our point across and communicating in a way that is meaningful, but still doing it in a compassionate way. So a little bit about me. My name is Tracy Moon. I graduated with my doctorate from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga and have worked in a variety of settings. I've worked in a skilled nursing facility. I have worked in a continuum of care facility that goes from independent living apartments to assisted living to memory care. I have worked in an acute care hospital up in North Georgia, and now I'm working for the Emory's Cognitive Empowerment Program here now. So one of the things that I get asked a lot whenever I'm working with individuals, and specifically with individuals alongside their loved ones, is, can you help me talk to my mom or talk to my husband about this? Or can you talk to my husband or my mom about this? Because sometimes conversations can be hard, and it can be even harder with our loved ones. So we're going to dive into having some of those tough conversations. One of my colleagues called it courageous conversations. And we're going to talk about some things like driving. We're going to talk about repetitive stories or talking about the same topics over and over again. We're going to talk a little bit about scams and safety. We'll talk a little bit about establishing a routine, and then we'll talk about our expectations. So when I was preparing this presentation, I, of course, was looking for research and what the literature has to say on this topic. There's not a whole lot, but one of the studies that I found that was published in 2022 came to the conclusion that a person-centered orientation based on getting to know the participant and developing a bidirectional exchange formed the fundamental context for effective communication. Some of the things that they said that we needed to focus on were being flexible and adaptable, being compassionate, and making your conversation personalized. So if you're like me, you're thinking, so I need to be personal and I need to be compassionate. So that sounds a lot like how we communicate day to day. It doesn't seem like a radical conclusion. However, I think it's important for us to remember there's not this perfect equation that we can give you for how to talk to your loved ones. There's not like some special thing that you have to do to be able to communicate effectively. It's just important to keep things personal and be compassionate. I think where the difference comes in is that when we are dealing with our loved ones, we have to reframe our expectations. So we have to accept that things have changed, accept that communication is going to look a little bit different, and reframe what we are expecting from them. It can be hard because we have this like pre-established notion. We have talked to our loved ones forever, for the last several years, and we know kind of, you know how conversations are going to go with people that you talk to frequently. And I think that the hardest part of that is reframing our expectations, recognizing that things have changed, and most importantly, taking the time to rediscover our loved one's strengths. So when someone receives a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's, or even something like a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, it is going to alter the way that they're thinking about things, alter the way that they're communicating about things, alter the way that they're even perceiving what you're saying. And so it's important for us to take the responsibility of recognizing that things are going to be different, reframing our expectations, and really honing in on rediscovering their strengths. So instead of focusing on what ourselves or our loved ones are not able to do, I want us to think about what they are able to do. What are we able to provide? So whether if, my mom or my husband's strength is their long-term memory, so they, can tell me exactly what street the Dollar General was on growing up, then that long-term memory is something that we can hone in on in our conversations. If their strength is humor, a lot of people tend to find comfort in humor, then honing in on humor rather than trying to shut it down and, telling them not to make so many jokes, just honing in on those strengths and letting those strengths be seen. If it's music, playing music or dancing, or even baking, if you have a loved one that was a really big baker or a really big cook and loved to be in the kitchen, maybe they're not cooking as much now, but a lot of communication and kind of day-to-day conversations happen in the kitchen. So even if you're having your loved one tell you how they made something or give their input on something, just making it personal to them and taking the time to rediscover what's important, rediscover where their strengths lie. So we'll dive in. When it comes to driving is probably one of the most common topics that I get asked about on how do I have this conversation with my loved one. Driving is a very complex task and it can be a very dangerous task. So I want you to picture if your loved one gets overwhelmed, you're at Spaghetti Junction on 85 northbound, and someone pulls in front of them, they miss their exit, and you end up in Gwinnett County. Your gut reaction may be, you cannot do this anymore. You cannot drive anymore. However, I want you to think about reframing how you're thinking and reframing your conversation from you cannot do that to compassion and putting yourself in their shoes. So saying something like, the other day, someone cut me off on 85 and it was terrifying. Honey, neither of us are as quick as we used to be, because it's true. I mean, you can drive on 85 any day of the week and get cut off. So that's not a lie. But just relating in like some of those quick things that can quickly turn dangerous. And then you can make it a activity that you do together. You can sit down together, you can problem solve, you can talk about, how overwhelming it can be when you're sitting at Spaghetti Junction and you're trying to decide which route you need to take, or you're in rush hour traffic and somebody is honking on your tail and somebody's cutting you off, and just sit down and relate and talk about how overwhelming and how dangerous that has the potential to be. And then you can together talk about some alternate solutions. So maybe together you decide that it's best not to drive at night, or it's best not to drive on busy highways during rush hour. So maybe you're still driving just on, roads that you're familiar with, or not during those super busy hours. Or maybe you decide to try using something like Uber or Common Courtesy, which is where you call and they set up the Uber for you. Maybe you start looking at alternate solutions like that. Or maybe you choose to get a formal driving evaluation. If you talk to your primary care physician can absolutely make a recommendation and write a referral to go see an occupational therapist to get a formal driving evaluation. So just sitting down together, problem solving what that could look like, and then talking about alternative solutions. Nobody wants to just be told no. Nobody, I don't believe there's a single person in the audience that enjoys being told no. And especially as an adult, driving is something that gives you your freedom. It gives you that little bit of independence. And so talking about making the very selfless decision to give that up can be hard, and it can be a difficult one to make. So being compassionate and talking through all of the options that are still available to keep you as independent as possible is one of the key ways to be successful in that conversation. I want you to think about your cognition in two different ways whenever you're thinking about something like driving. This can apply to several different things, but driving is a really good example. So we have our functional cognition, which is your day-to-day orienting yourself to different places, problem solving and executing those complex tasks, organizing or expressing your thoughts out loud. So this is I need to get to the grocery store and home. How do I do that? Or you're on a busy highway again, and somebody is in your blind spot. And what all do you need to do to continue going straight and make it over into that lane safely? That's more of your functional cognition. And then you also have your procedural memory, which is something that you have learned at some point in your life and have done repetitively throughout your lifetime. So something like driving that you have done every single day since you were 16 years old is something that is in your long-term memory. It is an implicit memory. You can do that with your eyes closed. Obviously, we would not drive with our eyes closed, but those are the kind of things that are in your procedural memory. So when you say, no, you cannot drive anymore, they can. I mean, we all can. We have all driven for a very long time. We can get in the car, we can steer a car, we can push the gas pedal, we can push the brake. It is part of our implicit memory, just like eating is. So really focusing on those more complex, like orientation when it comes to getting lost. Maybe you have a loved one that has worked at the same building for the last 20 years and you get in the car to go, and suddenly it's a little more complicated trying to figure out where it's at. Or you go to a grocery store regularly and that grocery store maybe now is difficult to get to. Or, problem solving in a quick instance of what you need to do in a driving situation is more that functional cognition, and is something that we see declining quicker than that procedural, you can or cannot do it. When it comes to something like repetitive stories, this is another thing that I've had a lot of loved ones and patients talk to me about. Is my aunt tells me the same story every single time that I talk to her. And I want you to encourage that. I don't want us to, sometimes I know we can think like, you have told me this 1,000 times, but it doesn't matter. In the big scheme of things, what harm is it doing? So instead of saying, you have told me that, or you've already told me that, try something like, tell me about that. There's a lot of research on reminiscing, and reminiscing specifically on positive experiences. And the research has shown that reminiscing can increase social connectedness. It can reduce our cortisol levels, so those stress hormones. It can improve overall quality of life, and it can decrease depression. So I want you to reframe the way that you're thinking about it as your loved one is using those brain cells. They are engaging in good communication with you. They're working on finding those words. They're telling you something that's important to them. And think about connecting with your loved one in that instance, rather than trying to correct them. There is an occupational therapist, Tipa Snow, who she has come up with this positive approach to care model. And she has a ton of YouTube videos, she has podcasts, she has all kinds of things available, free resources out there. And she has this quote that says, "It's the relationship that is most crucial, not the outcome of any one encounter." So I just love that. And I want us to keep that in mind, that it's not the outcome of any one encounter that's going to make or break anything. It's the relationship and the emotional connection and the relationship building that you're doing in that conversation, rather than focusing on correcting or controlling. It emphasizes, if you're emphasizing the relationship and connecting, then you're emphasizing more that you care rather than you're trying to control. Scams and safety is one of my favorite topics. We talk a lot about this actually at the Cognitive Empowerment program here at Emory. Scams are everywhere today. I mean, scams, they're getting more and more advanced, and they're getting more and more personalized, and they are scary. I mean, they're everywhere. You cannot turn on your phone and not have an attempted scam. So for this one, instead of thinking, how could you do that? Or how could you let that happen? I want you to think of trying something like, scams can seem so realistic. What can we be looking for so this doesn't happen again? Because ultimately that's the goal. What's done is done. There's no going back and undoing what has been done. It's just no amount of arguing is going to fix it. So at this point, we need to look at, what can we do to prevent this in the future? And I have to inject here that they are tricky. My husband was trying to call Xfinity and used Google and called them, and was like halfway through the conversation asking to turn off our cable before he realized that he was not actually talking to Xfinity. So, I mean, it's very easy to fall into. So keeping in mind that scammers have gotten more advanced, and that they tend to target older adults, that they love the older adult population, and it tends to be, unfortunately, a target of a lot of scams. So again, you can make this an activity that you do together, where you're sitting down, you're brainstorming scams that you have seen, or scams that have personally been directed at you, whether that's all of the email, FedEx, Amazon scams that are out there right now, or everyone's favorite, the car insurance or whatever the one is, that's the phone call. So brainstorming what those are, and then brainstorming how you can avoid them and what some red flags are that you can be looking at. So talking about, like, if it's too good to be true, it probably is, or taking a really close look at what the actual email address is and not clicking into other links. So sitting down together, getting out your pen and paper, writing that stuff down, talking about it, is a really good activity to do together. And then, of course, you can always look at freezing your credit. If that is something that you all want to do together, you can freeze your credit. And we always recommend that you use strong passwords as an extra layer of security. I think the recommendation right now is like 16 characters, which is a lot, but having a good, strong password on your accounts can go a long way. And then we can always establish a routine. Establishing a routine can help ease frustration for everyone. That is our goal in all of these little topics, is just easing frustration, keeping things calm, and keeping things easy. So things like writing down appointments on a calendar or having a whiteboard up on your wall that you write your appointments down or schedule for the day on is a good habit to get into. That way everyone knows exactly what to expect for the day. There's no big surprises. There's a lot of good research out right now about creating a routine early and building those habits so that they will last, even if the disease, if somebody has Alzheimer's or a stroke or whatever that might be. If cognitive function is declining, a lot of times those habits that are built into that long-term memory that we talked about earlier with your implicit memory, if you can build those habits in, then a lot of times they will carry out throughout your life, and it'll make things easier and avoid frustration for everybody involved. It's also important to set aside time for meaningful tasks each day. As an occupational therapist, I have to put this little tidbit in. Going through the motions every day and getting up and getting ready and watching TV and then going to your doctor's appointment and then, coming back and just checking the list off of things that you need to do is necessary, but setting aside time for things that are meaningful. So if driving is not an option for you anymore, but cars are something that has defined your life since you were 16 years old or maybe even longer, then finding a new outlet, a new way of engaging in that task. I'm not saying take it away forever. I'm just saying if driving is not available, we can kind of reroute that hobby. So looking at things like model cars or going to a car show or magazines, they have car magazines, whatever that might be. Or if gardening was something that you love to do and now you physically just cannot do it, maybe just having one little plant, on a table somewhere is a good alternative. But making sure that you're still engaging in those things that give you meaning and purpose every single day is a good way to just help ease frustration and keep things purposeful. I also want to encourage you not to rush or overcomplicate tasks. I think in today's world, everything is so like hustle and bustle and how much can you get done in a day? And I think it's important that we, as humans, no matter where we are in life, remind ourselves to kind of take the time to slow down. Everything is so overcomplicated and get so many people involved and just rushed through that when it comes to our daily routine and those habits that we want to stick throughout our day, it's important to make sure that we're not rushing and overcomplicating tasks and that we're taking the time to sit down and enjoy those sometimes mundane daily activities. So to kind of wrap everything up, when we're talking about communicating effectively and compassionately, the things that I want everyone to remember, not that anybody needs anything more on their plate, so we'll keep it simple, is to just stay positive. Whatever mood or tone you're putting forward and you're modeling is going to define the entire conversation. So if you're coming at it from a compassionate, understanding view, then you are much more likely to have an effective output. If you're coming at it angry and confused and like blameful, then you're less likely to get a productive conversation. We want to emphasize our loved ones' strengths and focus on what they are able to do, not what they're not able to do. We want to problem solve together and offer solutions. That is my biggest word of advice, if nothing else sticks, is to problem solve together, to sit down and think about like, what's going on here? Why is this so hard? What can we do about it? What other solutions are there out there? And if you don't know any other solutions, then there are a lot of resources through Emory and through Alzheimer's Association and multiple other places, or even just asking your primary care provider. But offer solutions. And if you don't have solutions to offer, then look for them. That way, you're not just saying, no, you cannot do this. Nobody wants to hear that. We're just going to find a new and better and safer way to keep doing it. And then, of course, our final takeaway is to connect instead of correct. No matter what is going on in the conversation, if, you know, it's somebody is thinking that, you know, they're somewhere completely different. It's not always about getting the facts completely correct or remembering things spot on the way that they happened, but instead just connecting and being there and understanding, building that connection instead of trying to correct somebody. And that is all I have for you all today.
That was excellent, Tracy. And I want to go back to something that you said. It's not always about being correct. We're trying to connect. So for those of us who get frustrated because the person we're living with and loving and caring for is doing something opposite of what we need them to do, what's the best thing to keep a caregiver from losing his or her patience?
I think the biggest thing, and I know that this is hard because I've dealt with this in my family, but I think the biggest thing is the reframing our expectations. I think a lot of the frustration comes from, you know, I have called my mom or I have talked to my husband every single day, and they always give me advice on how I need to handle these situations that I get in. And so when that dynamic kind of changes and they're not filling the role that they used to necessarily in the same way that they are now, I think that it can cause a lot of frustration and just missed expectations. I mean, I think in all areas of our life, missed expectations can be an area that causes stress. And so I think managing our expectations, accepting that things are going to change, they're going to be different. It's just part of it, part of aging in general. And then just reframing our expectations, kind of relearning our loved ones. I mean, sometimes whether it's a small change or a big change, taking that time to just relearn how they tick, because they don't tick the same way that they used to. And identifying their strengths, finding new ways to connect, and just kind of learning how to reframe what the relationship is going to look like can be not easy, but can be a good way to kind of work on managing your expectations and frustration.
You mentioned Teepa Snow as somebody who had lots of videos for people to learn about communications. I'm very familiar with Teepa Snow, but how can we, I don't know whether there's a specific website, but more importantly, you're an occupational therapist, and many of our listeners have decided, okay, I might need to see an occupational therapist. Can you tell us really how to go about getting one, finding one? I mentioned it's from a doctor's order, but how do you learn about occupational therapists that specialize in dealing with people who have cognitive problems or driving problems? Driving courses are not something, or driving evaluations aren't free with your insurance. Aren't they separate?
Yes. So for the first question, a lot of times finding a good occupational therapist, especially in our arena, I think it's important to note that there are some occupational therapists that are strictly orthopedic occupational therapists. So if you get a referral to an OT and you walk into your neighborhood benchmark therapy, you will probably get a orthopedic occupational therapist that won't know what to do when it comes to like cognitive training or something like that. So first and foremost, it's important to look specifically for a neuro-occupational therapist. A lot of times those are connected to hospitals. Emory has neuro-occupational therapists, and like Northeast Georgia Health System has neuro-occupational therapists. But it's important to know the difference between a orthopedic occupational therapist that is very, very extensively trained on like shoulders, elbows, wrists, and hands, but not as extensively trained on cognition. So that would be my first recommendation, is to make sure that you're seeing a neuro OT. And then as far as Tipa Snow goes, if you type her name into YouTube, she has a variety of YouTube videos that are short, which is what I like. They're not like super long videos. A lot of them are like 15 to 30 minutes. And she does like little lessons and very practical hands-on advice for caregivers. She also is a guest on several people's videos and podcasts. So if you just search her name, TEEPA Snow, you will find a variety of resources from her. And then I'm trying to think what the last part of the question was. I'm not sure. Did that answer it?
The question was about driving evaluations and paying for an occupational therapist.
Yeah.
Do you
So
how are services from an occupational therapist covered, and is a driving evaluation different?
So occupational therapy services in general, like a typical evaluation and treatment, is covered through insurance. Once you get an order, you would just go for your initial evaluation, and your occupational therapist would come up with what we call a plan of care. They would let you know, if they want to see you 2 times a week or 1 time a week, and you would together establish goals. And so a typical OT evaluation and treat is covered by insurances. However, a driving evaluation is not. So there are several places that offer driving evaluations across the state of Georgia. I'm not several, there's like 5. So there's not a ton, but there are a few options. And they are not covered by insurance. So with those, you do still have to have a doctor order. But unfortunately, you do have to pay out of pocket for a driving evaluation because it is so specialized. And through that, we offer those here at Emory. They will do a in-clinic assessment. So they'll look at things like your visual perception, your reaction time, your visual field, problem solving, all of that. And then once you pass the clinic portion, they will actually take you out on the road to do a driving evaluation. And a lot of times the driving evaluations, if you decide to go that route, can give you recommendations like I mentioned, like not driving at night or avoiding busy highways or, just staying local in your neighborhood. It's not always a yes, you can drive, no, you cannot drive. Sometimes that is the case, but a lot of times it comes with recommendations. Look through the Q&A.
I'm
Yeah,
looking
there's
in
about
here
3 or 4
myself,
more
trying to see.
questions.
Okay, it says, how do you deal with a loved one who becomes angry or mean? And I think this is a good one because a lot of times when people are cognitively impaired, their judgment is a little off, but it doesn't take much for them to get angry because you're trying to correct or do something different with them. How do you handle somebody who's become somewhat mean or obstreperous or belligerent? How do we do that?
I think this is a hard one. And again, something that I have dealt with in my own family, and is even harder when you're in the situation because it's not, you take it a lot more personal. So I think the best things that we can do is redirect. A lot of times that agitation comes from an unmet need. And so whether that's feeling like they're not being heard or feeling like something is being taken from them or just feeling misunderstood is a lot of times where that agitation comes from. So I think taking it back kind of to the beginning of my presentation and taking the time to emphasize their strengths. So if it is a loved one that you're familiar with, a lot of time, like physical touch can help, even if it's just holding their hand, just letting them know that you're there and that you understand. And it can be hard because I know a lot of times when somebody else is angry and agitated, it's hard to show compassion and empathy, but understanding that the reaction is not a direct result of you, it's more so their feelings of not being able to get their point across or feeling frustrated with the situation rather than with you. So reframing it to where, if like we mentioned, their strengths. If music is their strength, just playing music and redirecting the conversation, or talking about long-term memory. If their long-term memory is their strength, bring up something, a story that you have heard from their childhood, or I think redirecting is typically the best approach.
There's one other question. You talk a lot about the cognitive empowerment program where you are. Can you explain to people what that is and how that works, and if that's an option for them or not?
So the Cognitive Empowerment Program is a program through Emory. We are a 6-month program. We just transitioned from a 1-year program to a 6-month program. And we have a variety of professionals. We are a very, very interdisciplinary team. And so we have participants that come to us 1 day a week for a full 6 months, and they receive classes from occupational therapists, from our neuropsychologists, from our social work team. We have a nutritionist and dietitian that talks a lot about like the mind diet and foods to stay away from and foods to help protect your brain and things like that. And then we also offer a variety of physical activity classes. So we have yoga, Tai Chi, and then physical activity with our personal trainers. And throughout the 6 months, while our members are getting all of these different services provided to them, we're really honing in and emphasizing the impact of lifestyle changes. So we know that there are lots of exciting and emerging medical advances when it comes to Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment. But this program specifically is a research-based program that looks at the differences that things like nutrition or physical activity, like you all do every Tuesday at 2, kind of the difference that those things can make on overall quality of life, brain function, and caregiver support. So we typically have members and care partners together in the program. The way to get into the program is we currently right now are only taking referrals from Emory doctors here at the Brain Health Center. So if you are local to the area and in the Emory system, you can, if you're seeing one of our doctors over here, you can ask about CEP to see if it's an option. It is for the mild cognitive impairment stage, so the earlier stage of the disease, but it is available to anybody within the Emory system.
I didn't see any other things in the chat other than, oh, there is one. Are there other such programs like the cognitive empowerment programs in any place else in the country?
I am not sure. I know that there's another multidisciplinary program similar, but I think ours is pretty revolutionary. The goal of CEP is to eventually be able to create this framework for our program that will eventually be disseminated to other places. It's not happened yet, but it's in the works.
Well, but there are similar kinds of programs, and in San Francisco, there's a program called Unlock, which is very similar in terms of activity, culture, activity, medical assessments, cognitive assessments that goes on. And you might look that up if you're in San Francisco in that area. There are programs designed for older adults called PACE programs. Boston has them. There are more of them in California and more of them in Massachusetts than there are any place else in the country. But these kinds of programs are developed by researchers in different places. But the one that we have at in the Emory Cognitive Empowerment Program is unique to Georgia. I don't see too many others. Oh, spell the program in San Francisco. Yes, On Lock, LOK. They have 4 programs: one for Asian Americans, one for Italian Americans, and one for people who don't identify as other, but it's the Unlock program in San Francisco. ONLOK. So I think that just about does it. Tracy, you've given us a lot of information. We're going to call you back and probably have you do some FaceTime with us to help improve some of our communication. Ms. Dorbin, Ms. Davis, do we have anything else?
Yeah, just quickly, we're going to